Hi. Hi. This is In Search of the Anima Mundi, Part 9, To See or Not to See, Michaela Villiers-Kendall. It's the 27th of August, 2020. So, okay, there's the elevator. In Part 8, I got to the part in the series which concerns the search for the Anima Mundi, which is the alchemical, hermetic search for the world soul. And if you've been watching any of the other parts, it's I've been following the labyrinth, the thread, the golden thread through the labyrinth. And for some time now, I've been using Stanley Kubrick's film, The Shining, to illustrate. It's an amazing film because it actually gets more complicated all the time. As I explained in Part 8, he uses a fugue, what's called a fugue, which is the story under a story. And his mainstay is the book of Hamlet's Mill, which I discovered at some point. And he's laid the clues very well so that you progressively get more into it and pick up the clues as you go along. And it's like a real journey. It's a real learning curve in alchemy, and something actually astrologers should all know something about. We all know something about myth, but we don't know that much about alchemy, and actually it's all conjoined. It's, as I say, it's massive. And the film does get more and more complicated, but he does explain it beautifully. And he uses the story, actually. Hamlet's Mill refers to the story of Hamlet, which it turns out is the story itself of Hamlet refers to the Golden Age, which is the mythical Golden Age. Whether it took place or not, nobody knows, but it's been in so many stories, myths, works of art. There's been a secret code, it seems, down the ages, down thousands of years now, and even the constellations, in fact, mainly the constellations are involved with the story, including the Bible, which I did mention the books of David Warner Matheson, which explain in a less complicated way than Hamlet's Mill, which does explain about the constellations and the connection to alchemy and the tree of life and astrology and all of it, and alchemy. But David Warner Matheson does it more simply. He's actually written a new book, which I'll hold up, you can see it there. I didn't want to use a slide on it, so because I've only got so many slides. So that's called Myth and Trauma. So, and it's to do again with the constellations and their connection to how the myths, and he says it very well in the prologue. I might just read a tiny bit of that, because he introduces this. He's actually published had it published this year, before, it was obviously planned before the COVID disaster. Disaster, by the way, that's disconnection to the stars, a catastrophe. Anyway, so he says in this, if you want to oppress people and take away the natural resources given by nature to those living in a land, it is easier to do so if they are traumatized. The concept of psychological trauma is not new. In fact, it isn't at all. We can see that this concept was deeply understood well before the very first ancient texts, which we can examine, were written down. What is newer is the application of the word trauma, which typically refers to a physical wound, to psychological and emotional issues, and not just to physical injury. So I'll just cut to the chase on that. Okay, so he says about the world's ancient myths, they speak very clearly about this subject and about the way to overcome trauma and to repair the accompanying disconnection from the self. Unfortunately, although the world's ancient myths and ancient scriptures and sacred traditions convey this very positive and beneficial message, They have been twisted and even inverted in order to traumatize rather than to heal trauma. Literalism, and especially literalist interpretations of the scriptures we call the Old and New Testaments of the Bible, have caused and continue to cause enormous trauma and suffering in the lives of men, women, and children around the world. So he just adds there, the ancient myths can be shown to be metaphorical rather than literal, and they can be proven to be metaphorical rather than literal because the figures and events described in the myths relate directly to specific constellations and heavenly features and to the celestial cycles, including the cycles of the earth, moon, sun, visible planets, the old ones obviously, but actually since the newer planets from Uranus onwards, they are included in the myths you find, and even the ages-long cycle of precession. So anyway, so where we got to last time, just before the end, we got to the death of the twins. I haven't put that up because that was in the last one, but it's a well-known scene of the dead twins. It's very bloody and shocking, but quite charmingly, I think it's charming, in that bloody, shocking scene, Stanley Kubrick conceals the procession of the ages. He conceals the death of the twins, which was the age of Gemini. And that took place about 6,000 years ago, because it's as you know, it's roughly 2,000 years for each age. So when the age of Taurus came in, that was the end of the age of Gemini, and he's reproduced that with the stars of Orion's belt reflected, with the axe, which chops its way through the processional great wheel, apparently, with Orion's chair overturned, and with the dead twins mirroring each other. And on the wall, there's a picture which shows the axis, which is tilted at 23 degrees. The story with the Golden Age is that it came to a sticky end. I did look into it since the last part, and Atlantis does seem to be the myth or based in reality, in fact, because it is known that there was most likely an empire that stretched over the world. In the northern hemisphere, it was called Atlantis, the Atlantean Empire, with Atlantis at its center, which is probably, they say, around Gibraltar, Spain, that coastline, an enormous city and empire that were master builders. They were charters of the world, the first charters of the constellations. In fact, the amazing achievements, technological achievements and knowledge that they had, reportedly. And what we have left of it was when apparently, and the age gets messed up a bit because the age of Taurus, was obviously that was 6,000 years ago. But it seems like there might have been two cataclysms. There might have been one at the end of the Ice Age when the ice was broken and the sea levels rose, and then there was a disaster then when probably a lot of cities, coastal cities, which Atlantean cities and Lemurian, which were on the Pacific, on the southern hemisphere, would have been pushed into the sea. And they have found, as I said, ancient structures all over the world, which led people to believe maybe they lived, the myth of Atlantis was they lived under the sea, which is obviously, that's another thing that's added to people not believing these things. And there's a lot of myths that's come up about reptilians and UFOs, and which, I mean, who knows, there could be extraterrestrials involved. We don't know that, and it's so far back. That's something we can't know. But the point is, at the moment, a lot of conspiracy theories have been mixed up with these myths. And so it's getting to the bottom of all of this is pretty amazingly difficult. But unfortunately, what has been encouraged, as David Warner Matheson says, is what has been encouraged is is the misinterpretations, is people being misguided, being lied to, in fact. In fact, Carthage, which is the nearest thing that was to the Atlantis, the structure of Atlantis, the layout, was sacked by the Romans very famously in about 150 AD, BC. And it was erased. It was erased completely. And there is thought that that occurred because even back then, Rome was growing into an empire and wanted to dominate the world. Carthage had dominated the world, and so they wanted to take that over. And they conspired to do that eventually by destroying Carthage completely. Carthage, of course, was part of the Phoenician Empire, and the Phoenician Empire were the Canaanites. And it seemed like there'd been sort of a downing of the Canaanite history, even perhaps before the Romans, but who knows? Because there's been a lot of lies fly around, as there still is, there seems to be, as we know, and it's all coming up again. And there is a tradition of all this coming up at when an age changes, when there's a new age, and we're due for the age of Aquarius, as everybody knows. We are in, the gears have started already, we are in the process. And at those times there is upheaval, but in this time, particular upheaval, because it's time for the lies to be exposed. So all of this sort of has been in the process for a while, but now it's heading for a climax. And I think we see that it's now becoming that people will not stand for the lies anymore, and they realize actually this world that we thought was, well, not perfect by a long chalk, but is pretty messed up, and has been for thousands of years, and it's time it changed. Anyway, so let's press on with that. What happened was, yes, I'll get to that now, but I'll just say something about the Legend of Osiris and procession. The Legend of Osiris, which is on the header, which is the Eye of Horus, which is represented by the moon. The moon represents the unconscious. It's a long story, but we'll get further in that when we show the slides. The Eye of Ra, which is the other eye, the right eye, which controls the left side of the body, is the eye of the sun. So they are different. And anyway, it's quite complicated, but the myth is that Thoth was was connected with the moon, and he was credited with having introduced all the arts and scientists, including astronomy, and to the ancient Egyptians. The ancient Egyptians, it is said, when Atlantis, the empire, was destroyed by some sort of cataclysm, a flood, a deluge, whatever, and possibly by uprisings of some sort. It all went horribly wrong anyway. And what happened was, when it was destroyed, the survivors scattered. It's like the Noah's of the Ark myth, which is probably based on that. So the survivors scattered to different parts of the world, some to Egypt, and they eventually built the pyramids in an effort to conserve the stories and the information and the spiritual information, because all that would be lost, and already the world was going to a bad place. So because the great democracy of Atlantis was lost already. You saw it being tried to raise, so some went to Greece, obviously there was efforts to raise democracy there, and in the myths and the constellations and everything. So, and some went to Carthage, which is Tunisia, modern day Tunisia. And so the Canaanites, that's where they were. Anyway, so back to the picture. It's just a quick, it's just about the 72nd, so it's the 72nd part of Thoth. He, and yeah, the very, very interesting part is they actually they knew, and so did the ancient Egyptians, because obviously they were survivors. They knew about the precession of the equinoxes, and they knew because of the wobble in the axis, which is the 23 degrees. And the story was that it had been knocked off its axis at one point, and then since then mankind struggled. That was probably way before that, the age of Taurus. And there is some scientific debate about that as well, but that goes billions of years back. But it could be based on that even. There are legends that about this straight axis, which actually is representative of the spine in the tree of life. It's the spine, so it's man. It's man knocked off its axis, and since then struggles for spiritual alignment, for spiritual, for the raising of consciousness, which is, it's about the Kundalini and all that. Anyway, so here we are. We're in the first part of the film. I had to backtrack to that briefly. And this is where Danny's in the bathroom, and he's about to get the first sighting of the blood elevator. And that's the superimposed crossover from the last slide, from the last shot, which was his father, Jack, in the office in the interview. So this now goes to him. So you get his face superimposed on the shower curtain. And that's part of the story, which I'll add to later as well. So anyway, he's at the bathroom sink, brushing his teeth, and he gets his first sighting of the elevator, the blood elevator. So look at that slide, the blood elevator. Okay, so there it is. So, so the blood elevator would seem to be indicative of the deluge, of the flood. It has many meanings. The meanings are layered, just like the actors and the different characters. They play different roles, just like the constellations do, and the mythologies. They each have a role that doubles up, trebles up, and so forth. So the bloody elevator, at one point at the start, represents the deluge, which is the flood. And so, like Haran says in the scene with Danny when he's at the table having ice cream, Haran says about the shining. And he says that the shining is like burnt toast, that some things you can shine from the past, long, long ago, and also you can shine from things that haven't happened yet. So this is obviously his first shining, and it's from long, long ago. It's from the deluge. Okay, so I think go on. Right, so this, I believe, which was what Kubrick meant too, because he's used the constellations in the picture, like they said in Hamlet's Mill, and like David Warner Matheson describes in his books. So he's aligned that scene very cleverly. He's used that premise that the constellations describe the myths, like in works of art. That was their premise. And he's lined up the Milky Way with a Fucus and Sagittarius. And interestingly, actually, so the Milky Way often stood for a river or smoke, or in this case, it is a river. It is the river of blood. It's the deluge. And so the Sagittarius would be Danny, and you can see even the figure could be bent over, the way it's looking there, like he's bent over the sink. It's very clever. And Danny later in the film, so you pick up this later now, because you don't pick it up earlier because you haven't got to that part of the film that demonstrates that Danny was associated with Apollo. And Apollo in the myths is associated with the constellations of Sagittarius, with the bow. You can see the bow there. And that's first shown in the game room when Danny is throwing darts. And so he is representing Apollo, and that should ring a bell with anyone who knows the film later. That's part of it, obviously. So Danny is Apollo in this, and he's Sagittarius, and a Fucus is, you could say, the mirror, And the mirror represents a portal. He's seeing seeing the vision. He's shining into the mirror, and Ophiuchus represents, as I say, in the myths, in the constellations, often the gates of hell, because it's down on the lower part of the Milky Way, as is Sagittarius, and as you see, the Scorpio, which is a little along from that. So that's the part of, as you know, the zodiac that goes down towards the natural I see, which would be Capricorn, 0 degrees Capricorn, which is 0 degrees, which is the winter solstice. The winter solstice part of the chart, the lower part of the chart, which I described last time, it represents in myth hell, but it also represents the descent that's necessary in order to reach transcendence. So you have to descend first into the unconscious, in other words, the Eye of Horus, the moon. So this is part of the moon, this story, in order to then ascend once you've passed the point of 0 degrees Capricorn, the darkest hour, midnight. Hence midnight, the stars and you in part of the film. So Ophiuchus is there as the gate, and he is shining through Ophiuchus. Yeah, okay. So it's a funny thing about Ophiuchus, though. I'm quickly say about that, because Ophiuchus was not included in the, as we know, it's the 13th sign and wasn't included in the zodiac. There is, I don't think I haven't got time to get it now, but he says here in Myth and Trauma that it's likely that it was taken out, that it was there in that age, in that golden age, but then it was removed later when the patriarchy decided that they didn't want they wanted a more solar zodiac rather than the lunar, which is more feminine, as they were going away, as Jeffrey Wolf Green says, from the natural law, and when the matriarchy was prevalent, and the lunar zodiac would have been then. Anyway, that's the theory. So anyway, let's press ahead. Okay, so that's Danny. Often through the film, you get this mask of Dionysus, as we realized it was, and it's a mouth. The mouth wide open is also a portal. It's like it's the beginning. It's the initiation. But interestingly, in this is what is shot up straight after he gets the shining of the elevator, and the twins. He gets the twins as well. Interestingly, I only just noticed this, that his sweater is actually from what he's wearing later in the movie, in winter, when he escapes, in fact. So I think that's giving a link to actually that scene with Ophiuchus, I still can't say it properly, and Sagittarius and the Milky Way is also linked to the end. So in other words, the descent leads to the ascent, the going up to the higher part of the chart, the zodiac wheel. And also that band is it's the earth colors he's wearing, the Indian motif, which is associated with the ancient spiritual knowledge. So in that shining is, yes, the past and the descent, but also the promise of the ascent. It's complicated, but I think that's what it means. Okay, let's press on. Right, so just briefly, that's a flashback to the scene after, where he's collapsed and he's being examined by the doctor, and that's got the Jacob's ladder scene in as well, which I'll go into another time later on. She's actually looking into his left eye, and that's what that means. It's the Eye of Horus. She's examining his left eye, and so it is drawing attention. It is actually, it is linking him with Horus even. So he there is not just Jacob, he's Horus. Yes, it's confusing, but anyway, but very clever. So that's that. So just press on, because we haven't got that much time to dwell on each one. Okay, so that is the eye of, that's actually the eye of Ra. That's the other eye, which is the right eye, which represents the other side of the body, the left side of the body. So it is the sun, it is the male principle, it is the consciousness, not the unconsciousness, which is the other side. And all that was explained at the start of the movie. A few, you know, of the series back when I first started it, with the left and right sides of the brain and all of that. Anyway, so, and that's, as you can see, and a lot of people know this, that it's actually the eye of Ra and the eye of Horus are representative of the corpus callosum and the thalamus. The thalamus is to do with the moon, and it's to do with the hypnagogic, the shamanic, I should know how to say it. I was trained as a clinical hypnotherapist, but hypnagogic state, Gothic state. So it is to do with trance. And you'll later see, yes, it can be exploited for mind control, which is another of Kubrick's points. Okay, so I won't dwell on it, but that's that. So we'll move on to the next one. Yeah, the one back, just one back. The Michelangelo, yeah. So just briefly, well known, the Sistine Chapel, that's Michelangelo's paintings of God and Adam, and God obviously is in the brain. So that's what the real meaning of that was before. It was disguised. In fact, when I went to the Sistine Chapel just a couple of years ago now, I was amazed to see all of that up there, because it's so obviously the zodiac is used, alchemical, hermetic, gnostic, Kabbalistic. I mean, it's so obvious. And so I wondered at first if Michelangelo was sort of pulling a fast one on the Pope, and he didn't know, but I think we'll see now it sort of comes to light that actually he knew, the Pope knew, and the church knew. So interesting. It explains a lot of things, and we'll get to that later, hopefully. Don't run out of time. Anyway, so that's the brain, and that again is associated with the glands, you know, the thalamus, the pituitary gland, the pineal gland, the third eye. They're all accessing the third eye, the male and female as well. I won't dwell, I'd say more about it, I could, but you know. Anyway, so that's the old view of the universe, if there was a straight axis. And that's to ancient, as it says, philosophers, according to ancient philosophers. So you have the zodiac and you have the straight axis, and you have I believe that's the Pleiades and the pole star at the top, and the planets. You have the 7 planets at that stage, obviously. It's a few hundred years ago, I think, in the 17th century, 16 something. Okay, so we'll just plow on. So this is the Nama palette, it's called, and that supposedly, although there's debate about it, because it's actually the oldest depiction of a king of Egypt, and it depicts a lower king of Egypt and a higher king of Egypt, and the displacement of the higher of the lower, and that was used by an astrologer who, and she's a Freemason as well. And she says that it's to do with the age of Taurus coming in. And those are the Gemini twins at the bottom running. And you've actually got the guy with an axe. You can't see in that picture very well, but he is underneath the king. He's got an axe in his hand, propped up. And then there's Horus, which is signified by the hawk, and the Taurus bulls at the top. Right, to go on. That's about 3,500 years old, but it could be older. So yeah. Okay, so that's Orion, and you know we've had that before, but I just wanted to put it up there just to say Orion is the soul of Osiris, obviously, and the belt is in line with the pyramids of Giza. Right, so quickly, yeah, okay, so this is a flashback again to the start, where they're going up on closing day up to the mountain, and then you get to know, because you've pieced it together further up, that that's the triad, that's the holy triad. One of the things it represents is the holy triad of Isis and Horus and Osiris. So in this case, the characters are playing those three. Yeah. And they're also playing the summer triangle as well, which is and that'll come in later to the story, the summer triangle, which is to do with the transcendent gateway, and the summer triangle that involves the birds too, 3 birds of Aquila, the eagle, the swan, Cygnus, and the 3 stars are part of those constellations. And also the last one is the swooping eagle, which is Vega, I think. Okay, so we'll just go. And also there's the Jungian thing, not the Jungian thing, the Freudian thing of the Oedipal triangle, because that's in the story as well. And then of course Oedipus is in Hamlet as well. So yeah. Okay, so that's Isis, and that's representation of Isis with the baby Horus. And then that in the constellation is represented by Virgo. That's the constellation of Virgo, which is, in this case, it's vertical to demonstrate Isis and the baby. But often you view it horizontally. Okay, so go on. So that's later on in the movie. That's on the Saturday, I think. And that's at the same time Danny would be getting his vision of the twins, the death of the twins. And at the same time, Jack is working. It's shown him working up in the Colorado room. Well, so you think he's working. Anyway, so that's Wendy, and she's gone down to the office because they're getting snowed in at this point. The snow is there's a storm coming, and the snow is getting thicker and the dark is approaching. And also it's indicative of the time of year, because it's those lights, because you get to know that he's using the light reflections and the 7 lights there, which would indicate the Pleiades, the 7 sisters. So the Pleiades were reported, I have something on, yeah, it says here Halloween, which is November 1st, which of course is a crossover day, a cross-quarter day, I mean, which is another pagan festival, a very old festival. And it says, to many people long ago, the Pleiades reached their highest point at midnight, November 1st, the Day of the Dead, 31st of October. And it was a signal that this was the time of year to honor the dead. Many peoples believed that a great ancient cataclysm occurred when the Pleiades were overhead at midnight, such as the great biblical flood or the sinking of Atlantis. So it's all connected. The Pleiades have an ominous reputation, a dark reputation, because they used to be. They're not exactly there now, but they used to be at midnight at the top of the chart, the zodiac wheel, the constellations, the ecliptic, whatever. Anyway, there she is in her jacket. She on the back of her jacket, she's got a guy having a siesta. It's a Mexican scene, so he's sleeping. So it makes you wonder if what it's saying, because then I think in the next slide we can see that there's a poster on the wall, and that's the choking poster. And that's very important, it turns out to be, because obviously Danny is found to have been choked, so he's got marks around his neck later in the movie, and there you've got choking on the wall. You've got also, I didn't notice it before, but then you can see there's the open mouth, there's the mask of Dionysus in the middle, in the 0, in the O, and you've got king too. So king, it sort of makes you think, then you connect it to the poster in the games room, which was the MK Ultra poster, which turns out to be, which was the monarch butterfly, king, monarch. And it's all about mind control and about the trance. So the hypnagogic hypnagogic trance, the mind control, the which is the thalamus, which is all connected. So it's like the ancient knowledge being misused again, and this is another pointer to that. And you can also see the monolith in that. That's the shape of the pyramid underneath it, which is the monolith in 2001: A Space Odyssey. So there are connections there. So it's all painting, it's all putting pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together. Now, it makes you think that if her jacket says someone's asleep, is she asleep? Is she not awake? Is she under a trance even? Or is Jack the one asleep? Are they both asleep? Because that's what it's saying. And this choking, it means there could have been some, it's pointing to the programming where in MK Ultra they programmed supposedly, and it's widespread sort of, it's widespreadly said now, and there are books, a lot of books on it, that they used mind control in the CIA. But then it's, what Kubrick is saying, it's gone way, way back before that. And actually it's the ancient knowledge that's been used of the workings of the brain that was kept from people, kept from the masses, so that the elite could control the masses. And that makes sense. But anyway, so that I believe is one of the meanings. That poster has other meanings too, but that's, I think, the main one for now. So we'll just go on. So there you are. So there's, that's when Danny has gone up to their apartment in the hotel to get his car, and Jack is there. The time frame gets a bit mixed up here because this is Monday, so Sunday has been left out, and suddenly you've got Monday, so this is happening Monday. Kubrick seems to have done that on purpose. It's a sort of disorientation, but there could be more than that to it. You can see that Jack's reflected in the mirror. There's a meaning to the shape of the mirror, in fact. There you have above the Donna Lake, which is to do with the cannibalism that they were talking about as they went up to the lake, which is the connection to Columbus and cannibals. Columbus, yeah, the book about Columbus being a cannibal. Yeah, which was, I mentioned in a couple of parts back. So there he is, and he's sort of in a sort of a stupor. He doesn't seem quite there, and he's actually wearing Wendy's dressing gown, which is interesting. So he reaches out to Danny, and Danny is wearing a sweater too. Not the same sweater, not the Apollo sweater, but he's wearing a sweater with Mickey Mouse on, with his legs like they're in a goose step. And that's another connection to 42, because the film of 42 has been playing in the lobby, and 42 was on Danny's shirt at the start, his night shirt in the bathroom scene. And so the summer of 42 was playing. There is a connection to 42. We've looked at 42 names of God, 42 laws of Maat, but also there's a connection to 1942 that Kubrick is bringing in. And so if we go to the next slide, I think it shows, yeah, so that shows the sweater. And it also shows in the background, there's a red car. And we've also ascertained that the cars and the picture of the black horse, there's a black horse, which represents Revelation comes into it too. And the black horse represents the third seal, which is the black horse. But that's a picture of a black horse, but then the others are cars. So you've got the red car right there on the windowsill. So that is saying something about the red horse. Later, at the start, you've got the white horse. It seems the car pulled up at the tunnel, and that would represent the first seal. So there you have the red car there, which it represents war, and we ascertained that it was making reference to the world wars, because in this 100-year period, the lead up, there's a 200-year period. We're in the middle, of the transition into the age of Aquarius, it's said. And Edgar Casey and the Madame Blavatsky and all those talked about it. But it was channeled that we are in the middle of that period. And also the age of Kali sort of was something to do with early 1900s as well. So a lot of big disasters started. There was Titanic, which was, Jung got his presage of the First World War, and the Red Book's in this too. We're not going into that, but anyway, so there's the red cast. So there, it's about the war. So you've got 1942, you've got 42, you've got Mickey that looks like he's goose stepping. This is about the sacrifice too. So sacrifice comes into this, and we'll put the next slide on. So there, this seems to mirror, because the first one we put up was Balaam and the Ass, which Kubrick had lined up in the Colorado Rim in the day of the closing day, and he'd done the constellation. It's complicated. You'll have to go back to that one if you want to see that. I think it was the last one. But he's put the constellation of Balaam and the Ass. And Balaam and the Ass was to do with sacrifice as well. So he's now gone on to Abraham and Isaac. And it's pretty obvious. You can see that Danny is in the pose of Isaac. And Jack is Abraham. And there's Perseus, who is Abraham. And there's Isaac, who is either the lamb or the ram or an angel. The angel is Andromeda. So Andromeda is substituting, telling him to stop. And also the knife is at the 23-degree angle, which you will find in so many works of art, as I'll demonstrate in a couple of slides. And that's the 23-degree angle of the pole, of the ecliptic, of the axis. And so she's staying his hand, because this would indicate that it's the start of the age of Aries. And so the age of Taurus, which is where there were sacrifices going on, that's over. At least that's what it says in the Bible. And so the age of Aries is coming, so she's staying his hand and saying, no, you substitute. So there is a raising of consciousness. But anyway, yeah, I will go on to the next one. Excuse me. So that's another picture. That's a painting of the same scene. And then you're seeing the angle of, sorry, the axis. And so many pictures, so many paintings. Obviously, this was sort of, the masses didn't have this knowledge, except they got their pagan festivals and everything. But, and they got the scriptures, but they didn't, and they got their myths, but they didn't know the full story. It would seem like the people who could afford the education or go to art school, or who were aristocracy or leading members of society, had this information. It was sort of like passed down. So you just see it in so many works of art. It was like the secret. Yeah, so another thing to sort of separate society. So that's in the age of Pisces. So anyway, so go on to the next one. And there is Jesus Christ with the cross. And then you see the angle again is 23 degrees of the axis. And there, that 52 degrees is the pyramid. It's the side of the pyramids, which are both 51.51 or something, but 52, rounded to 52 degrees. And so that's the pyramid. So you're seeing the Great Pyramid there, as well as the angle of the, as well as the tilted axis, which, you know, the underlying message is it's because, you know, Jesus Christ is having to suffer because of mankind's fall and because of the fall of the axis, because there has been something wrong. The Wetiko, as we've had in another of the parts, the Wetiko that Kubrick brings in with Columbus and other cannibals, and the mind, there is something, and you know, Kabbalah talks about the demiurge and the satanic mind. There is something wrong with people's minds, and they have to reach for consciousness to overcome it. Okay, so we'll go on for that. The next one. Okay, so this is so 42. I just wanted to say before leaving this, and this is Mithras. We've had that. That was symbolized by the bull early on in the flat in Boulder. There's a little bull on the shelf, and so the bull keeps coming into this. It's come through and that's the age of, again, it's the age of Taurus, where all this sacrifice was supposedly began, and the supposedly sacrifice of children too, not just bulls and rams and animals. But anyway, so this also shows that sacrifices took place on the solstices and the equinoxes. So at the equinox, at the spring equinox, there you get the torches pointing down. That's the fall equinox. So you've got the torch pointing down on the left-hand side of the picture, and then you have the torch pointing up, which is the spring equinox, and it's showing the sacrifice, because that's when sacrifices took place. And this is the Cult of Mithras, which was the cult in Rome. And I'm not sure how long they had it, but they had it for quite a long time, and they retained it even though they seemed not to, and that's part of the story. The 1942, as I was saying, there were two things going on there, main things. In 1942, obviously the Second World War was going on, but two main things, obviously the Holocaust, and then the other thing was the Manhattan Project began in 1942, which was the development of the bomb, which I have had earlier in the series. And so in the development, which both, they're major signatures that something is wrong with mankind, because, you know, the Holocaust obviously was horrific, and the Nazis used also the ancient knowledges. And they searched worldwide for more ancient knowledge in order to get, they thought they would, Himmler was part of that. That was his main idea, and so was Hess. And Hitler wasn't so much into it, as I've said before, but they thought that they could gain power through this, and maybe they did use some of the ancient knowledge, but they were insane too. Anyway, but it seems like insanity is widespread. It wasn't just them. Anyway, so yeah, so the Holocaust was one thing, and final solution took place in 1942, and the other thing that took place was the Manhattan Project began, which, when you think of it too, it is trauma. When, you know, about this myth and trauma, well, you know, how traumatized are we? We are traumatized. We've been traumatized down the ages, and we're still being traumatized. And even though there were excuses for letting off the bomb, the developing the atomic bomb, it's traumatized us ever since, because it was an excuse to drop it. And whatever they say, my parents knew people who were tortured in the Japanese war camps, and it was horrific. It's true. But it is now established that the Japanese were ready to surrender when the bomb was dropped, and it wasn't really necessary, but it was and it said it was to demonstrate the power in order to stop further wars. And I did go into that in that part of the series. I think it was part 3, perhaps part 4. But when you really think about it, it's too far. It's a hellish thing to have done, and we've been traumatized ever since, because we think it's going to happen again, and it could. So when you really think about these things, you think there is something wrong, you know, very wrong. And now we're beginning to see it again. The COVID, you know, the truth virus is showing us, and it's coming up right at the right time. So we have to look at it like that. Interestingly, Sagittarius, the north node the south node in Sagittarius right now is at the galactic center. So it's and that was partly why I wanted to call that, apart from the reference to Hamlet, to call this part of the series To See or Not to See, because we need to see now. We are seeing now. We're beginning to see. We are awakening, and our consciousness has to raise. And unfortunately, we've got to go through all this upheaval first, because not everyone will be conscious enough to realize that you should do that in a peaceful way, like Martin Luther King. But I mean, it's got to happen because the world is messed up, and now we finally are seeing it. We have to see it for the Aquarian age, as I said before. Anyway, so Kubrick obviously saw this as well, and lots of other great minds. Okay. And next time I will go into the Cult of Mithras, because that is part of the lies that were told. And, you know, it began with Carthage. It is said that knowing that Carthage was based on Atlantis, I finally went into that, and I saw a very good documentary saying about all this and Kubrick does take us through the sacrifice and through Molech, you know, and the Canaanites and all of that, and Baal, the Lord of Baal, which is Jack takes the role of Baal at one point, and who was a Canaanite who was sacrificed to by people's children. Well, it's said now that that was propaganda laid by the Romans. They not only destroyed Carthage completely, but they wanted to destroy their history, and they also wanted to destroy their future, any sort of good thought of them for the future, because they were going to combine. And I will go into that, and it goes into it in Myth and Trauma. Actually, it goes into it in his David Warner Matheson's other book, The Undying Stars, about the big conspiracy between the Romans and Josephus after the destruction of the temple at 70 AD. Anyway, so this is the last slide. I hope I'm on time. So this is the hotel. It's getting darker, and as you see, it's mirroring the same thing, the same constellation. It looks like a fucus. It's late. So it's taking on not just the mirror of hell. So in other words, it's a fucus. It's the portal. It's the gateways of hell, and it's getting dark. And yeah, that's, but there is Sagittarius in that, and there is a dawn. There is, as I said, there's the seed of the future too that's being shown at the same time. Oh, and above you can see the Milky Way, the smoke. There's a trail of smoke going down the mountain and into the mountain, and that's representing the Milky Way. So it's obvious he means it to be a fucus. But later Sagittarius, Apollo will slide down that, you know, in his escape and his avenging of his killing of the Typhon. Yeah, not Typhon. the snake. Yeah, the serpent, the evil one, Satan. Anyway, so yeah, so there you go. It's the same as in the start, and that's what it's saying. There is a link. Okay, so hopefully I'm in time there. The end, thank you.